Hello and welcome to my friend the Rainbow Circle. Since I brought up Saturday Night Live when I was talking about the fallacy of nostalgia, good basic analogy for the fallacy of nostalgia for sure, and I wanted to make sure to do a couple of videos talking about my Opal Bean War project to try to cover. It's a 30-story project at this point, depending on how you measure what a story is. So I wanted to touch on as many of them as I can before I give a presentation on them, and what really goes into the background of them, and how do you really understand them in context of the Rainbow Circle. I realize I have my hand right here, but kind of like the color juxtaposition. That brings up another thing that I wanted to bring up. I've taken a lot of inspiration from sketch comedy over the years, which is one of those things that you may not actually want to admit, but I think you can, as a writer, I've only taken my inspiration from super sophisticated things. No, I've taken inspiration from very, very unsophisticated things for sure. But sketch comedy is a really interesting place to boil down a lot of narrative techniques, because it's a very short narrative, has an arc, it has all of these different components that really demonstrate the push and pull between stimulation and destimulation. My dogs want to go murder something out in the backyard, so they're being very whimpery right now. Maggie, do you want to go murder something? Is that what you want? I don't want you to murder anything. They might be trying to murder the neighbor dog, which is terrible. They're just obsessed. Maggie was foaming at the mouth, barking so much a few minutes ago. Now she desperately wants to go back outside and keep barking. I don't want you to go foam at the mouth outside. Just let it go. Deal with your issues, you neurotic beasts. But anyway, but I've talked about Bathos before. Bathos is just a fun technique to work with, but you can take some of the story structures of sketch comedy. Sketch comedy is not really designed for the long term. Technically, you do have a handful of movies where the setup is like a sketch. They don't really have the sort of characters necessarily to sustain long form storytelling. It works every once in a while, hence why. Hey baby. Hey, baby. Okay, sit down. Hence why some Saturday Night Live characters work as full movies and some don't. I'm being hit in the face with a tail. A connection, I just, as I was talking about Saturday Night Live and the nostalgia fallacy, I was also talking about Bohemian Rhapsody. Bohemian Rhapsody really had two periods of really heightened popularity. The first one was when it first came out, and the second one was after Wayne's World, which did for Bohemian Rhapsody kind of what I was talking about with all these people who watch it for the first time and are just amazed by just how crazy it was. That's how I watched it for the first time, was in the Wayne's World movie. And that's the Wayne's World sketches. What's the setup for the sketch of a Wayne's World sketch? It's just two characters, and I think that's partly why that one works really effectively as a long-form movie, is because it's not really rooted in a situation necessarily. It's rooted in these two characters are really empathetic, so you can build a whole story around them. Whereas it's Pat, movies like that, the Coneheads. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of any sort of Saturday Night Live movie that didn't quite work. Those are based on kind of a wacky situation that plays out in the space of like 3 minutes or something like that. So you have Bathos setups, where you can play out the scenario in just a few minutes, for sure. Sometimes it's sustainable for a full movie. And really, Monty Python was the best at the Bathos. Bathos is a very idiosyncratically British sort of tone. As I mentioned, Douglas Adams does it expertly. He has a whole series of little Bathos based sketches just over and over again. But those books would not be sustainable and if you didn't care about Arthur Dent at all, if Zaphod was not a really compelling character. If Trillian becomes a much more compelling character in later books, but Trillian. So if those characters weren't interesting and compelling, they would not sustain a long form storytelling, and most sort of sketch setups don't. So a sketch setup like a Bathos setup is entertaining, and it has that short burst of stimulation that can peter out after just a few minutes for sure. But you have to have that in order to really make it sustainable for like a full short story or a novel. I mean, you could have sort of a sketchy Bathos setup and then sustain it for a full novel. One of my favorite Monty Python's versions of that is the argument. Are you here for an argument? They had a lot of setups like that, where it's you go to a store and you're buying something that you wouldn't normally buy, and so he buys an argument, and it's just contradiction, and then they start to argue about what an argument is. It's really it's really well done, and you have asking all these communist and Marxist luminaries about soccer trivia. There's tons of sketches great Monty Python sketches like that, which could you really sustain it for a long-term narrative? Well, probably not, but it's a nice setup. But your standard sort of sketch structure is a combination of two things that don't seem to belong together. And Bathos, just to redefine it, I defined it in a different video, but just to redefine it, it's a juxtaposition of tone, something really, really serious with something that doesn't quite, something really high with something really low, something really, really, really serious with something very, very silly. Lots and lots of sketches have that sort of setup. The one that I'm working on for the Opal Bean project, you guys are coming to beg me to go outside to murder, aren't you? I'm not going to let you outside. Just give it up. They heard the word outside, and they're running towards the door because they don't understand English. Do you understand English? I'm not letting you back outside. You're just going to bark at whatever you're barking at. No. If it's a snake, are you just barking at a snake? I'm not scared of a snake. The snake's not going to hurt us. I don't need you to go kill that snake. Whatever it is you're barking at, I don't need you to kill it. We're fine. If it gets in the house, you can kill it. I don't want you to kill it at all. I like snakes. But if the snake figures out some way to get into the house, it's fair game, frankly. Although I would prefer zero killing of anything right now. Well, anyway. Not advocating the murder of snakes, I'm just saying. If the snake gets in, I mean, there's not much I can do unless but I've done that before. I found a snake in here, and they were trying to kill it, and I saved one. I didn't save another one. Anyway, what was I saying? Bathos setup. So the one that I'm working on for the Opal Bean project, Opal Bean War project, it's called Gin Among the Mobilians, and each one of the Opal Bean War stories was based on a prompt, and the prompt that one's based on is Iphigenia Among the Taurians, which is but fast forwarding it to the present day. But the idea is Iphigenia was going to be sacrificed. I'm not a Greek scholar by any stretch, so I'm probably going to get some of this wrong. Just be forewarned. If you care, whoever's watching this, I have no idea who's going to watch it, but whoever just conceivably could possibly be watching this, maybe you're a scholar on Greek history, so if I get anything wrong, just let me know. But Iphigenia was going to be sacrificed for fair winds to sail to Troy during the Trojan War, by her father, and it led to all kinds of other craziness. So if you transported that to the present day, I've done similar sort of thing with, this is one reason I was riffing on this sort of interpretation of it, but I did a similar sort of thing with Abraham, because Abraham is such a crazy story. If you really think too much about it, Abraham gets this order from God to sacrifice Isaac. So he just does it. He just goes up to the mountain, and then there's a ram that replaces him. But I was fascinated about what Abraham was really thinking, so I rewrote that story, not from a didactic perspective. I wrote a play called The Memo, about how this Abraham character is sitting in this corporate office. He gets a memo that says he has to sacrifice his son, and the memo is from God. And it's primarily just about how he responds to it, and what he thinks about it. Not from a really didactic perspective, but just, what would a character like that be thinking? It must be really intense. But Gin Among the Mobilians is from the Iphigenia's perspective, Iphigenia character's perspective. How does she process the whole notion that she has to be sacrificed? And for that one, I'm integrating my obsession with Jack Kirby space gods, because she's going to be sacrificed to a Jack Kirby space god. Because why not? It's my story. I love Jack Kirby space gods. Something like the Celestials. So, I'm pretty sure she's going to escape. I wouldn't want. That's a particular story where the trajectory more than likely is that she's going to escape. But, writing that kind of story in 2019, I definitely would need to give her some agency, and that's the place I am right now. So I was talking about my story, the other ones, where I hadn't really. I'm still exploring who the characters are. I set up the situation where, it's the sci-fi setup where they'll have the capacity to change their gender, and there's this challenge to what gender means. So if I start just from who the characters are, and just explore what they do freely, give them agency and explore what they do freely, that makes the story really interesting. They've turned on each other now. Can you go for 10 minutes without barking at anything or biting anything or growling? My dogs. Anyway, yes, I'm talking about you. I'm basically through with my point, so, in just a second, you guys just go to town if you want to start fighting with each other. But my point was, if you have a setup like, this this young woman, trying to keep my cows covered. There you go. There you go. Okay. Under a ton of dog. Oh, under a ton of dog flesh. Okay. Yeah. I see it. I love you too. I love you too. Okay. Okay. So, what if somebody, this young woman who's trying to get her life together, and is working in this corporation run by her father, that's sort of the idea. Her father runs this corporation. She's trying to get her life together. She has this job. She gets this. She hears a rumor that she's going to be sacrificed to save the city. And right now, I'm just in the stage of just figuring out who the character is. Just what would she do in that scenario? And I'm hoping she'll escape. I mean, I'm trying to give her as much agency and free choice and sort of active motivation as possible. So in that scenario, probably more than likely. Hey, what's up? Probably. There we go. Probably more than likely, she'll find some sort of escape. But it's just a matter of discovery. But it's a similar scenario with the other ones where, you have the setup, and if you, okay, oh, you have the setup. You have the setup, and if you give them the free choice, they'll discover it themselves, and you'll discover it along with them. So the writing process is this delightful discovery process, for sure. But that's a technique just for a setup. That's I talked about Harold Pinter. Harold Pinter has this very, very simple setup where he just puts two people in a room. So I like to play around with that sort of opening for a story, but just shaping it as, you know, like a sketch comedy setup. But because sketch comedy setups don't tend to be all that sustainable, the way to really make it a sustainable long-term story, just thinking about Din Among the Mobilians and, you know, all the different elements of Iphigenia among the Taurians that could effectively function in the story, it's more than likely going to be a long-term story. I barely even started it. I barely even know who the character is, really. But more than likely it's going to be a long-term story. Just that the name itself implies that she escapes. So the city is going to war with Mobile, Alabama. I thought that was kind of funny. Jin Among the Mobilians implies that she does escape at some point and goes among the Mobilians, people from Mobile. Just because partly because I like the phrase. Why Mobile, Alabama? I don't know. Just it sounded funny in my head, and that's really the only justification. So presumably, stop. Presumably, okay, be still. Be still. I'm almost done with my point. Can you just give me a second to wrap up, please? Thank you. I tried to set up the couch, kind of nice behind me, but, you know, the dogs have mutilated it thoroughly. So anyway, Jin Among the Mobilians implies that that's kind of the trajectory of the story. I'm just, that, you know, I set up the beginning, which is kind of an interesting, appealing sort of setup that I've done before. You know, I've worked with that a couple different times, that kind of thing. It's that bathos of that really, the really serious thing of human sacrifice, you know, this really highborn thing. The bathos comes in when it's in the context of the present day. It's in the context of just, you know, a seemingly normal person just doing her job, and she gets this word that she's going to be sacrificed to a space god. You know, that sort of bathos is really appealing, interesting setup. That alone is not sustainable, so that's where, in order to make it long-term, and that's really just a structural thing. How long is it going to be? Sketch comedy is totally fine as this short little piece, but if I want to set it up as a long-term thing, I really have to root it in an effective character who could, you know, sustain a long-term narrative. So anyway, now that I've rambled, because, as always, my chaos dogs have entirely scrambled my brain in order to talk effectively about anything. Haven't you, Siku? Have you scrambled my brain? Siku! Have you scrambled my brain? Okay, say bye. Now that you scrambled my brain entirely. See you on the next episode. See you on the next episode.